time here as a verb, flies here as an object, like an arrow, which means adverb clause. The meaning is get your stopwatch and time. This speed flies as you would time, and arrows flies. And the other example is time flies, which is a noun, like a verb, and like it is a verb. An arrow, it is an object, so it means that time flies are fond of arrow, or at least of one particularly arrow. So, post-structuralists assert that if we cannot trust language systems to convey truth, the very basis of truth unreliable and universe, or at least the universe we have constructed becomes unrevealed or decentered. Nietzsche uses language slips as basis to move into the slip or and shift for a truth of a truth as a whole. What is the truth? Truths are the illusion about which it has been forgotten that they are illusions. This returns us to discussion of structuralist area regarding signs, signifiers, and signified, especially post-structuralism, holds what that we cannot trust the sign and signifier plus signified formula, that there is a breakdown of certainty between sign and signifier, which leaves language system hopelessly inadequate for replying meaning, so that we are returning to the era in external free play and instability. Sorry. What is left? Important to know, however, is that deconstructions is not just about tearing down. This is common misconception. The era in signature event context addressed this limited view of post-structural theory. Deconstruction cannot limit it or proceed immediately. A new translation, it must practice or overturning of the classical opposition and general displacement of the system. It is only on the condition that deconstruction will provide itself the meaning, the means, or the means with which the intervenes in the field of oppositions that it criticizes, which is also field of non-discursive forces. The era reminds us that through the deconstructions we can identify the in-betweens and marginalized to begin intersexual knowledge building. Sorry, moving between the slides. Modernism, postmodernism. Here it explains the difference between modernism and postmodernism in criticism, which is with the resistance to traditional forms of knowledge, making science, religion, language, inquiry, communication, and building meanings, take on different forms to post-structurals. We can look at this difference as a split between modernism and postmodernism. So sorry, sir, do you have my voice?
Yes, yes, of course. Carry on.
Okay, okay, thank you. The table below, excerpt from the theorist Ahab Hassan, or Ahab Hassan's The Dismemberment of Orpheus, offers us a way to make sense of some differences between modernism, dominated by Enlightenment ideas, and postmodernism, a space of a free play and discourse. Keep in mind that even the author, Hassan, is quick to point out how the dichotomies are themselves insecure, vocal. Though post-structuralism is uncomfortable with binaries, Hassan provides us with some interesting contrast to consider. Here the table shows the difference between the terms or the words or concepts between modernism and postmodernism. As we can see here, for example, let's have the vocabulary, the purpose. Purpose in modernism, it is not like postmodernism, which have enchants. Hierarchy in modernism, it means anarchy. So master or logos, exhaustion, and science. For example, centering in modernism, it is absence in postmodernism, and etc. As you can see in this table. So moving to the next slide, which is about narrative, which is related to postmodernism. The narrative is a fiction that looks readers into interpreting text in a signal, chronicle manner that does not reflect our experience. Postmodernism text may not adhere to traditional notions of narrative. For example, in this seminal work, Naked Lunch, William S. Burroughs excludes the traditional narrative structure and critiques almost everything modern. Modern government, modern medicine, modern law enforcement. Other examples of author playing with narrative include John Fowles, sorry, in the final sections of the French Lieutenant's Women. Fowles steps outside his narratives to speak with the reader directly. Moreover, grand narratives are resisted. For example, the belief that through science the human race will improve, and questions in addition, metaphysics is questioning. Instead, postmodern knowledge building is local, saturated, celebratory, and self-critical. Questions itself and its role, because most structural work is self-critical. Post-structural critics even look for ways text contradicts themselves. Author. What is about author? The author is displaced as absolute author or authorities, and the reader plays a role of interpreting the text and developing meaning as best as possible for the text. In The Death of the Author, Ronald Barthes argues that the idea of singular authorships is recent phenomena. Barthes explains that the death of the author shatters modernist notions of the authority and knowledge buildings. Lastly, he states that once the author is dead and modern idea of singular narratives and thus authority is overturned, text becomes plural, and the interpretations of the text becomes collaborative process between the author and the audience. A text is made of multiple writings, drawn from many culture and entering into the mutual relations of dialogue, but there is one place where this multiplicity is focused, and that place is a reader. Barthes ends his essay by empowering the reader. Classical criticism has never paid any attention to the reader. The writer is the only person in literature. It is necessary to overthrow the myth. The birth of the reader must be at the cost of the death of the author. Here are questions arise by the postmodernism. If we read a text, and we apply postmodernism criticism on this text, so these are the questions that the postmodernism arises. The first question is how is language throws into the free play questions in the work. For example, note how Anthony Burgess plays with the language, Russian versus English, in A Clockwork Orange, or how Barthes plays with the names and language in naked truth. The second question is, how does the work undermine or contradict generally accepted truths? And how does the author or character change, or reconstruct memory and identity? How does a work fulfill or move outside the conventions of its genres? How does the work deal with the separation or lack thereof between writer, work, and reader? What ideology does the text seem to promote? What is left out? And the last question is, what is left out of the text of included might undermine the goal of the work. If we change the point of view of the text, say from one's character to another, or multiple characters, how would the story change? Whose, whose story is not told in the text, who is left out, and why might the author leave or have omitted this character's uh, lives? And as we can see here, we have examples for the postmodernism writings about literature. We have Naked Truth in 1955 by William, and we have Burning Your Boats. It is Angela Carter, and we have Blood and Guts in High School by Kathy Acker. We have Paul Auster, and as you can see, we have Haunted Houses by Lynn Tillman, and the last one is The Water Journal by David in 1996. Okay, sir, this is the end of my presentation about the post-modernism. And sorry for misspelling words.
It's okay, fine. Thank you very much indeed. Yes, there were some mispronunciation. It is okay. If you practice, it will come over. For
Thank you so much, sir.
Dichotomy or many others. But
Yes.
it is okay. Thank you very much indeed.
You're welcome, sir.
I will, if we have time, I don't know, apart from you, is there any other students ready for giving their presentation?
Yes,
Because I
sir.
wanted to,
Yes, sir. I think Taysir, Muna, and Huwaida, if they are ready
okay.
and their microphones are working, probably.
Okay, thank you very much
You
indeed.
are welcome, sir.
Because there are lots of things. Before moving to the next presentation, which is about feminism, first of all, thank you very much indeed, Muhammad, for your presentation.
You're welcome.
What I want to make clear between structuralism and post-structuralism is that structuralism insists on binary oppositions. Binary oppositions means we always have two things that stands against each other. For example, God, human, nature, culture, man, woman, sun, moon, white, black. And structuralism gives privilege according to the grand narrative of the society. It gives privilege to one of these sides. For example, when we have a um, binary opposition of black and white, according to our culture of the ordinary culture of the society, and which is under the influence of the grand narrative. Grand narrative is the idea that we believing in. For example, a kind of a religion, a kind of an ideology, a kind of a thing that it is in the way of hegemony is very popular in the society. Something that the culture and the society accepted in a way and believe in it. So this is called grand narrative. We understand everything according to that grand narrative. We believe that truth is according to that specific explanation and representation of that grand narrative. So in our culture, white has privilege over black for some reasons. I'm not going to explain. Or for example, in a patriarchal society, men are privileged over women, or sun is privileged over moon, or nature is privileged over culture, or God is over human being. This is called a kind of um, perceptual understanding of the concepts. What appears to be, because we have God. God is something that created everything, and we believe that God in a metaphysical world is the source of the power. So God has privilege over human being because God has created human being. Or nature has privilege over culture because first should be nature and then culture is created within the nature. This is called uh, perceptual privilege. But what about conceptual privilege? When we have the dichotomy between God and human being, who has created the idea of God in the language? Human being. So the privilege will move to the human being. This is human being that think that there is a God and God is the creator of everything in the world. Not only this world, but also other worlds and of the uh, doomsday. Or if we do not have language in our culture, how can we explain what nature is? So nature has privilege over, sorry, culture has privilege over nature. If the patriarchal society and grand narrative gives the privilege of uh, man over woman by saying that men are stronger, they can think better, and this kind of thing. If there is no woman, how men can be born? So the privilege is moved to the women, and so forth. If there is no black, how can we understand what white is? This is something that postmodernism posed on by emphasizing on the undecidability, the difference between structuralism and the construct theory and post-structuralism is that structuralism insists on one meaning only by decoding the codes, but structuralism and postmodernism emphasize on the multiplicity of the meaning. So in different, uh, if you go to Ihab Hassan uh, explanation of the differentiation between modernism and postmodernism, for example, we see that in modernism, the emphasis is on romanticism and symbolism, but in postmodernism, the emphasis on paraphysics, like quantum theory, or of modernism is on the form, but because they believe that form is um, a very important part of the, for example, literary work, since we are dealing with literature. But in
Sorry, sir. I think your voice is lost.
Taysir, do you have my voice? I have activated your microphone. Taysir, if you have my voice, please start your
Good morning, Doctor.
good morning, Taysir. How are you?
Good morning, Doctor.
Good morning. Good morning, Taysir. How are you? Welcome to the class, and we are ready for listening
Thank you,
to
Doctor.
your
How are you?
presentation in feminism. Thank you. Taysir, I think that my voice was cut off for a while, isn't it? You couldn't hear me for a while.
Yeah, no, it's very good.
Okay, because I have explained postmodernism, and I don't know whether you have heard it or not. Anyway, we are ready to
We
hear
don't
your
hear
present.
you. The sound
Oh,
cut off for a long
I'm
time.
sorry. Oh my God. Oh, I
No
explained
problem.
everything
This
about
is,
postmodernism.
yeah.
Okay, carry on. We are all ears, and the class is yours. You can start.
Feminist criticisms is considered with the ways in which literature and other culture production reinforce or undermine the economic, political, social, and psychological operation of women. This school of theory look at how aspects of our culture are inherently particular, male dominated, and aim to expose misogyny and writing about women which can take explicit and implicit forms. This misogyny tension remind us can extend into diverse areas of our culture. Perhaps the most chilling example is found in the world of modern medicine, where a drug prescribed for both sexes often have been tested on a male subject only. Feminist criticism is also considered with less obvious form of marginalization, such as the exclusion of women writers from the traditional literary canon, unless the critical or historical point of view is feminist. There is a tendency to underrepresent the contribution of women writers. Common space in feminist theories. Though a number of approaches exist in feminist criticisms, there exists some area of community. This list is extracted from Denson 92. Women are number one. Women are approached by hierarchy economically, political, social, and psychological. Particular ideology is the primary means by which women are approached. In every domain, number two, in every domain where particularly Trans woman is either she is marginalized, defined only by her difference from male normal and values. 3. All of Western Anglo-Europe civilization is deeply rooted in particular ideology, for example, in the public portable of Eve as the original of sin and death in the world. 4. While biology determines our sex, male or female, culture determines our gender, skills of masculine and feminine. 5. All feminist activity include feminist theory and literary criticisms has as an ultimate goal to change the world by promoting gender equality. Do you hear me, Doctor?
Yes, I'm hearing. Carry on.
Gender issue play a part in every aspect of human prediction and experience, including the prediction and experience of literature, whether we are consciously aware of this issue or not. Feminist criticism has in many ways followed what some theories call the three waves of feminines. First waves of feminines late from 17, early 19 years. Writers like Mary Wollstonecraft, Vindication of the Rights of 1792, highlight the inequalities between the sexes activities, like Susan B. Anthony and Victoria Whitehall contribute to the women's suffrage movement, which leads to national universal suffrage in 1920 with the passing of the 19th Amendment. The second wave of feminines, early 1960 years late to 1970 years, building on more equal work condition necessary in American during World War II. Movement such as the National Organization for Women, which have the first letter NOW from in 1966, coherence feminist political activists. Writer like Simon D. Behavior and Alan Showalter, established the groundwork for the disseminations of feminist theories dovetailed with the American civil rights movement. The last one of the wave feminists, the third one, which began in early 1990s years, present, resisting the perceived essentials over generalized or symbolized ideologies and white heteropsychology, middle class focus of second wave feminines, third wave feminines, or borrows from both structural and contemporary gender and race theories see below to expand on marginalized um, populations experience. Writers like Alice Walker work to reconcile it feminines with the concern of the Black community and the survival and wholeness of people, men and women both, and for the promotion of dialogue and community, as well as for the violation of women and of all varieties of work women perform. And this is also Tenson 107. From feminist criticisms, we can which introduced some question for us. I mentioned some type of a question, typical of question, like number one, how is the relationship between men and women portrayed? And two, what are the power relationship between men and women or characters assuming male-female roles? Three, how are male and female rules defined? And for what constitutes masculine and femininity? Five, how do characters point these threats? Six, do characters take on threats from opposite genders? How so? How does the how does this change other reaction to them? Seven, what does the work reveal about the operation? Economical, political, social, or psychological, or particularly, what does the work imply about the possibility of sisterhood as a mode of resisting particularly? What does the work say about women's creative rights? What does the history of works reception by the public and the critics tell us about the operation of particularly? And the last one, what role does the work play in terms of women's literary history and literary tradition? This is all about
thank you very much.
feminist criticisms.
Thank you very much indeed. As you could see, it deals with.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you very
For
much.
hearing me.
Taysir, thank you. As you could see in feminism, the main concern is about the discrimination that has been always from the patriarchal society and considering the women as marginalized creatures, and they never paid attention to them. So they want to be considered, and from now on, the literature that they have created, and also the way they write, and their value in the society, they like to be considered. So we have three waves of feminism: wave one, wave two, and wave three. First wave, second wave, and third wave of feminism. First wave started from 18th century by the writings of the Mary Wollstonecraft with the book Vindication of the Rights of the Women, and then it moved to the beginning of the 20th century with the writings of Virginia Woolf, for example, and Simone de Beauvoir by writing the Room of Their Own or The Second Sex by Virginia Woolf and Simone de Beauvoir, the British novelist and French philosopher. And then we have the third wave, which is actually begins from the 1960s onward. And also in the continuation of these movements, we have the appearance of the emergence of the new movement called womenism, which has started from 1960s onward, which is mostly about Black women and colored women. And we have three geographical distinction also. We have the French feminism, we have British feminism, and we have American feminism. French feminism very much insists on the psychology of the woman, and practitioners such as Kristeva and Sixo, and we have the second, the British wave or British feminism, which is mostly deals with society and deals with the social position of the woman. And we have the American ones who very much insist on the writing, like Ellen Showalter, as it was mentioned in the presentation, and Gilbert and Gubar, who very much insist on the woman's writing, and they have made a great distribution to this field, and they have made great actually studies, finding books written by women, literature produced by women, and by studying them, they have come to a kind of a to believe that there is a kind of a, as Hélène Sixot, the French feminist, mentions, écriture féminine, women writing. They believe that the women have a specific contribution to literature, and they use specific techniques, such as their works are more poetic. They do not use much punctuation, and also they use lots of imageries, lots of metaphors and similes and these kind of things. So in this way, they are different. So when we want to actually consider literary text from a feminist point of view, you have to consider these kind of things. How the work or the writer, if it is a man, they have represented the woman. If the woman has been neglected up to now, they bring women into their focus and things like that. And if the writer is a woman, what kind of techniques she has used and how they have represented their place in the society, which is of course different from the way men or male writers usually do. Very good. Now let's move to the next one. I suppose we will move to Mona Muhammad and New Historicism, if I'm not mistaken. Let me activate Mona's. Mona, your microphone is now activated, so you can start your presentation, which is about New Historicism, I think, isn't it? Go ahead.
Hello, Doctor. Good morning. You have my
Good
voice?
morning. Yes, I have your voice. You can
Yeah,
carry on.
Doctor, at the beginning, I want to say something. When you want to explain what my classmate, Sir Muhammad, your voice were cut off.
Okay. After you have finished with your presentation, I will repeat myself. Whatever I have said about postmodernism, I will repeat myself. Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Doctor. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I will begin with the new historicism, cultural studies from 19th century till present. It's all relative. So this is school and influenced by structuralist and post-structuralist theories seeks to reconnect a work with the time period in which it was produced and identify it with the cultural and political movement of the time of Michel Foucault's concept of episteme. New historicism assumes that every work is a product of the historic moment that created it. Specifically, new historicism is a practice that has developed out of contemporary theory, particularly the structuralist realization that all human systems are symbolic and subject to the rules of language, and the deconcentrative realization that that there is no way of positioning oneself as an observer outside the closed circle of textuality. This is by Richter. This is by Richter 1205. A handful of why considering a new historical theory, Tyson explains, is to think about the retelling of history itself. Questions asked by traditional historians and by new historicists are quite different. Traditional historians ask what happened and what does the event tell us about history. In contrast, historicists ask how has the event been interpreted, and what do the interpretation tell us about the interpreters. This is also by Tyson in page 278. So new historicism resists the notion that history is a series of events that have a linear causal relationship. Event A caused event B. So event B caused event C, and so on. So this is also by Tyson. A new historicist don't believe that we can look at history objectively, but rather that we interpret events as a products of our time and cultural, and that we don't have a clear access to any, but the most basic facts of history. Our understanding of what such facts mean is strictly a matter of interpretation, not fact. This is in page 279. Moreover, new historicism holds that we are hopelessly subjective interpreters of what we observe. So, in new historicism, we have also typical questions like number one, what language, characters, events present in the work reflect the current event of the author day? Number two, are there words in the text that have changed their meaning from the time of the writing? Number three, how are such events interpreted and presented? Four, how are events interpretation and presentation a product of cultural of the author? Five, does the work's presentation support, condemn the event? Six, can it seem be to do both? Seven, how does this portray criticize the leading political figures or movements of the day? Number eight, how does the literary text function as part of a continuum with the other historical, cultural text from the same period? And the question number nine, how can we use a literary work to map the interplay of both traditional and subversive discourse circulating in the cultural in which that work emerged and or the cultural in which the work has been interpreted? And the question number 10, how does the work consider traditionally marginalized populations? And that is all, Doctor.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for your presentation.
Thank you, Doctor.
Let me give a little bit of explanation about what you have just mentioned. As you can see, the name mentions new historicism. It means that it is based on the historical consideration of the text, but in a new way. New historicism is the name given to the American branch of cultural poetics, as you have mentioned, and is one of its originating voices was Mr. Greenblatt, along with the host of other scholars, which believes that once a culture uh, permits both text and critics, because all of society is interacting, interwoven, so are critics and texts. Since they are mingling together, so they are intermingling with each other. And both to each other, I mean the culture and the critic, and um, and to the culture in which they live and in which the texts are produced. So because all critics are influenced by their culture, new historicists believe that none of us can escape public and private cultural influences. So we are under the specific culture that we are living. We are going to examine or criticize a literary text. So each critic will formulate a unique interpretation of any given text, which is different from the others. So like its British counterpart, which is called New Historicism. New Historicism is is an American actually version of the movement in England, which is called cultural materialism, which is based on a Marxist critic called Mr. Williams. So they are very similar in this way. And like its English counterpart, New Historicism continues to be refined and redefined by its many practitioners and sometimes providing conflicting and contradictory approaches to textual analysis. Cultural materialism is a British branch of cultural poetics and is Marxist in its theories and political and cultural in its aims. And it finds its ideological roots in the writings of the Marxist critic, such as Louis Althusser and Raymond Williams, believing that literature can serve as an agent of change. Cultural materialist declares that a cultural hegemony, which is the idea of the Antonio Gramsci,
circulating in the cultural in which that work emerged and or the cultural in which the work has been interpreted. And the question number 10, how does the work consider traditionally marginalized populations? And that is all, Doctor.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for your presentation.
Thank you, Doctor.
Let me give a little bit of explanation about what you have just mentioned. As you can see, the name mentions new historicism. It means that it is based on the historical consideration of the text, but in a new way. New historicism is the name given to the American branch of cultural poetics, as you have mentioned, and is one of its originating voices was Mr. Greenblatt, along with the host of other scholars, which believes that once a culture permits both text and critics, because all of society is interacting, interwoven, so are critics and texts. Since they are mingling together, so they are intermingling with each other. And both to each other, I mean the culture and the critic, and to the culture in which they live and in which the texts are produced. So because all critics are influenced by their culture, new historicists believe that none of us can escape public and private cultural influences. So we are under the specific culture that we are living. We are going to examine or criticize a literary text. So each critic will formulate a unique interpretation of any given text, which is different from the others. So like its British counterpart, which is called New Historicism. New Historicism is is an American actually version of the movement in England, which is called cultural materialism, which is based on a Marxist critic called Mr. Williams. So they are very similar in this way. And like its English counterpart, New Historicism continues to be refined and redefined by its many practitioners, and sometimes providing conflicting and contradictory approaches to textual analysis. Cultural materialism is a British branch of cultural poetics and is a Marxist in its theories and political and cultural in its aims. And it finds its ideological roots in the writings of the Marxist critic, such as Louis Althusser and Raymond Williams, believing that literature can serve as an agent of change. Cultural materialist declares that a cultural hegemony, which is the idea of the Antonio Gramsci, another Marxist thinker, Italian Marxist thinker, is unstable. For literature to produce a change, a critic must read the works of the established canon against the grain and becoming resisting readers. By so doing, critics expose the political unconscious of the text and debunk the social and political myths created by the bourgeoisie and bourgeois classes. So they start reading against the text, they against the grain, they start swimming against the stream. So whatever the ordinary perceptions of the text is, they are going to have an opposite reading of that, to become resisting readers. Do not accept whatever it is mentioned in the text in order to have a better understanding of it. Actually, as it was mentioned, Michel Foucault and Clifford Geertz are also important figures in this way. So what we can categorize, what cultural poetics does and accept can be limited to these sentences that I'm going to read. It's intentionally smudges and the lines between history and literature, believing that text or literature and context, which is the history, are the same, and the literature has no history of its own, but it's in second in cultural history. Cultural poetics also admits that definitive interpretations of a text are unattainable because relevant material is too far spread to gather exhaustively, and we can never recover the original meaning of anything because we cannot hear all the voices that contributed to the event. One of the greatest study that this new historicist has done is by Greenblatt, is on the works of the literature of the 16th century. And by studying Shakespeare, Christopher Marlowe, Ben Jonson, and Spencer, they have come to some new ideas by saying that, for example, Shakespeare and Spencer showed a great tendency toward being close to the court, but Christopher Marlowe did not do that. He was very much keen of being at the side of the people, and things like that. So they have a very important concept, which is called the history of the text, or historicity of the text, or text of history. Historicity of the text or text of history. These two means that whether the history has left an impact on the literature of the time, or the literary text has left an impact on the what happened in the history of that country. For example, are the history and what has happened in Victorian period in 19th century has been reflected in the works of Charles Dickens, or the writings of Charles Dickens has made an effect or left an impact on what happened in the 19th century. And the bills that have been passed from the parliament for the betterment of the working of the children or of the women. They also believe that the literature is shaped by historical moments while also shaping the individual reader or listeners to these texts. So the relationship between social, historical, and other forms of things that may happen in the history and their reflection in the literature is of their concern. They also believe that writers like texts are subjected to social biases, cultural influences, and political agendas. Hence, no writer or critic can ever be entirely objective. So they have some kind of biases toward their writings. That's why they insist on resisting, to become a resisting reader, a resisting subject of reading. Resisting readers may have different kind of perceptions and understanding of their texts. Okay, very good. Now, do we have any other presenters today? Do we have Marxist criticism? Shima, are you going to make a presentation on Marxist criticism. Howeide, you are ready? Okay. Let me. Howeide, your microphone is now connected. You can start. Okay, you are going to present post-colonial. Very good. Go ahead. We are all ears. You can start, Howeide, if you hear me. Howeide, can you hear me? Your microphone is.
Good morning. Good morning, sir. Good morning, sir. Do you hear me?
We hear you, Huwaida. We hear you.
Go ahead. We can hear you. Go ahead.
Yes, yes, doctor. Uh, Post-colonial criticism is similar to culture studies, but it assumes a unique perspective on literature and politics that warrants a separate discussion. Specifically, post-colonial critics are concerned with literature produced by colonial powers and works produced by those who were are colonized. Post-colonial theory looks at issues of power, economics, politics, religion, and culture, and how these elements work in relation to colonial hegemony. Western colonized controlling the colonized. Therefore, a post-colonial critics might be interested in works such as Daniel Delos Robinson Cross, where colonial ideology uh, in cross-colonized toward which he shipwrecked and toward the black man he colonizes. The names Friday, Despite Heart of Darkness, Joseph Conrad, Oblivious Anti-Colonist Agenda, the noble points of the colonized population and the standard of the level to which it contrasted post-colonized
Do not have your voice. Howeide, you have lost your voice. Well, Howeide is disconnected, I suppose. She has to get in the class again. While we are waiting for Howeide to be connected, let me go back and repeat myself about postmodernism and what I said about postmodernism. I was saying that the difference between structuralism and postmodernism is that Howeide, your microphone is now open again, so you can continue. Yes, while we are waiting for...
Yes, doctor.
Yes,
I'm
yes, yes.
sorry
Okay, carry on, carry on.
because I'm on my road. I am traveling. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Seminal post-colonial writers such as Nigerian author Chinua Achebe
Achieve.
and Kenyan author Nogaji Waithoni have written a number of stories recounting the suffering of colonized people. For example, in Things Fall Apart, Achiba details the strife and devastation that occurred when British colonists began moving inland nature European colonists as events that led to the death of enslavement of thousands of Nigerians when the British forced their imperial government. In turn, Achiba points out the negative effects affecting ideas of identity and culture caused by the imposition of West Europeans during colonial rules. Criticism questions the role of the Western literary canon and Western history dominance of knowledge, making the terms First World, Second World, Third World, and Fourth World nations are critics by post-colonial critics because they reinforce the dominant position of Western cultures populating First World states. This critique includes the literary canon and histories written from the perspective of First World cultures. So, for example, a post-colonial critic might question the works included in the canon because the canon doesn't contain works by authors outside Western culture. Do you hear me, sir?
Yes, I am listening. Go
Yes,
ahead.
yes. Moreover, the author included in the canon often reinforce colonial hegemonic ideology, such as Joseph Conrad. Western critics might consider Heart of Darkness and
Now you're cut off. Wait, I have opened your microphone again, so you have access to your microphone. However, we can't hear you. Your microphone is open, but it seems that you yourself has closed it. I think since she is in the way while traveling, she faces this kind of problem. So while we are waiting for her to be connected, and since we are reaching the end of the class, okay, Hoveyde, Can you continue? Okay, carry on. Your microphone is open. If the internet provides the chance for you to speak, go ahead.
Yes, doctor.
Okay, okay, good.
I'm sorry because the net is very weak here. Final typical question. For question, what
Okay, I think the net is also is cut off again since we only have 4 minutes. Okay, thank you, Hobeide. No problem. Don't worry. I know the internet is not working perfectly, so you have a problem with that. Okay, now let's wrap this up. Postcolonialism, when it is written together, or post-colonialism, both spelling are used usually, consist of a set of theories in philosophy and various approaches to literary analysis that are concerned with literature written in English in countries that were or still are colonies of other countries. For the most part, post-colonial studies exclude literature that represents either British or American viewpoints and concentrates on writings from colonized or formerly colonized cultures in Australia, New Zealand, Africa, South America, and other places that were once dominated by India and so forth, but remained outside of the white male European culture, political and philosophical traditions. Referred to as the Third World literature by Marxist critics and Commonwealth literature by others. These terms, many contemporary critics think pejorative post-colonial literature, and the theories investigate what happens when two cultures clash and when one of them, with its accessory ideology, empowers and deems itself superior to the other. Some of the important names in this movement of post-colonialism are Edward Said, the Palestinian American philosopher and writer, by his book called Orientalism. Homi Bhabha, the Indian writer and scholar. Also, Gayatri Chakrabarti Spivak, again, Indian thinker and scholar, who is a feminist, Marxist, post-colonialist writer. And she is providing a concept called alterity, the people who are subalterns, the people who are considered as the second hand in the colonial countries. We also have some forerunners of these. Before these practitioners, we had Franz Fanon and Aimé Césaire, the African writers and scholars who have written lots of books against colonialism. The writings of Achebe, as it was mentioned, in the way that he criticizes Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, and also Nothingo, for example, by writing a novel, Devil on the Cross, have played a great contribution to this field. So the questions that may rise up in this kind of post-colonial writings, similar to many the schools of criticism. Postcolonialism uses a variety of approaches to textual analysis, deconstruction, feminism, Marxism, reader response criticism, and African American cultural studies. Uses post-colonial theories in their critical methodologies. Some critics, however, identify two major approaches or strains of post-colonial criticism. One is post-colonial criticism and post-colonial theory. Those who engage in post-colonial criticism investigate ways that texts bear the traces of the colonialism's ideology and interpret such texts as challenging or prompting the colonizers' purposes and hegemony, and they try to react against it. And more frequently, those who engage in this type of criticism analyze colonial texts from the colonizing countries. Post-colonial theory, on the other hand, moves beyond the bounds of literary studies and investigates social, political, and economic concerns of the colonized and the colonizer. So no matter which methodology a post-colonial critic may choose, it matters greatly whether or not the critics has been a colonial subject themselves or not. So those who have been the subject of the colonization ask themselves somewhat different sets of questions than post-colonialists who have not experienced such a situation. So the person living and writing in a colonized culture asks mostly three significant questions. Who am I? Who did I develop into the person I am? And to what country or countries or to what cultures am I forever linked? So the very obvious questions can be, what happens in the text when the two cultures clashes between the colonizer and the colonized? When one sees itself as superior to another? Or, for example, who in the text is the other with capital O, and it is not considered the center? Or, for example, what are the forms of the resistance against colonial control? Or how do the colonized people view themselves? Is there any change in this view by the end of the text? Or, for example, how do gender, race, or social class function in the colonial and post-colonial elements of the text? Okay, in this way we reach to the end of the class. Okay, Ravia, please prepare yourself for representing Marxism and other parts that have been left out, and new criticism by Mr. Ali. Safa is going to be presented, and also the ones that which have been left out. Critical race theory, good. So one more, we should have one more presentation for the next week, apart from new criticism. I think new criticism was not from the list, was it? But anyhow, it's okay, no problem. But if you check the pamphlet that I've sent to you as the lesson plan, I think we have eliminated new criticism. Check it out again, Ali. If it was not in the list, you can choose another one, okay? But if it was, because I don't remember it was in the list, it is important. But because it is not in the list, let's stick to ones that are in the list. Okay, critical race theory by Muhannad next week. And one more presentation for the next week. Okay, Ali. Thank you. Fine. Till next week, thank you very much indeed for your participation in the class. And till next week, I leave you all to the God Almighty. And see you next session. Till then, take care and goodbye.
Circulating in the cultural in which that work emerged and or the cultural in which the work has been interpreted. And the question number 10, how does the work consider traditionally marginalized populations? And that is all, Doctor.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for your presentation.
Thank you, Doctor.
Let me give a little bit of explanation about what you have just mentioned. As you can see, the name mentions new historicism. It means that it is based on the historical consideration of the text, but in a new way. New historicism is the name given to the American branch of cultural poetics, as you have mentioned, and is one of its originating voices was Mr. Greenblatt, along with the host of other scholars, which believes that once a culture permits both text and critics, because all of society is interacting, interwoven,